The gallows of Sweetwater Creek loomed like a vulture against the amber sunset as Violet Fletcher fought back tears, her wrists raw from the rope bindings that cut into her skin. Accused of stealing $500 from the town's bank money she'd never touched, she faced not just imprisonment but public humiliation as townsfolk gathered to witness her shame. "I didn't do it," she whispered hoarsely, her voice lost in the jeers of the crowd as Sheriff Holden roughly guided her toward the jailhouse steps. "Save your breath, Miss Fletcher," the sheriff growled. "Mr. Carrington's testimony is all I need. Says he saw you plain as day rifling through the bank safe after hours." Violet stumbled on the bottom step. Her blue calico dress, the only nice one she owned, now smudged with the dust of Sweetwater's main street. The year was 1876, and in this corner of Wyoming Territory, a woman's word meant little against that of the bank manager, especially a woman who worked as a seamstress with no family to vouch for her character. As Sheriff Holden forced her up the wooden steps, a deep voice cut through the murmuring crowd. "Then I'll be her witness." The crowd parted like the Red Sea as a tall figure stepped forward, spurs jingling with each deliberate step. Violet turned, her eyes meeting those of a stranger, a cowboy with dust still clinging to his denim and leather, his hat pulled low over eyes that burned with quiet intensity. "And who might you be?" Sheriff Holden demanded, his hand instinctively moving to the pistol at his hip. "Name's Drake Valero." The man's voice was steady, weathered like the plains themselves. "I just rode in from Cheyenne, and I can tell you that Miss Fletcher here was nowhere near that bank when the money went missing." Violet stared at the man, confusion clear on her face. She'd never seen this Drake Valero before in her life, yet here he stood, offering testimony that could save her from a prison sentence or worse. "Is that so?" Sheriff Holden's eyes narrowed. "And how would you know that, Mr. Valero?" "Because," Drake said, removing his hat to reveal sun-bronzed features and eyes the color of prairie sage. "She was with me." The crowd erupted in whispers. Violet opened her mouth to protest this obvious lie, but something in Drake's slight head shake silenced her. This stranger was offering her a lifeline, and despite her confusion, she knew better than to refuse it. "That true, Miss Fletcher?" Sheriff Holden turned to her. Skepticism etched on his weathered face. Violet swallowed hard, looking into Drake's eyes for a moment before nodding. "Yes," she said, her voice steadier than she expected. "Mr. Valero speaks the truth." Sheriff Holden looked between them, clearly disbelieving. "Well now, ain't that convenient? A stranger rides into town just in time to provide an alibi." He spat in the dust. "You'll both need to come inside. We've got some questions to answer." As they were led into the jailhouse, Violet could feel Drake's presence behind her, solid and reassuring despite being a complete mystery. Who was this man? And why would he lie to protect someone he'd never met? Inside the jailhouse, Sheriff Holden shoved Violet into a chair before the scarred wooden desk that dominated the small office. Drake remained standing. His posture relaxed but alert, like a mountain lion at rest. "Start talking, Valero," Holden demanded, settling his considerable bulk into the chair behind the desk. "What business you got with Miss Fletcher here?" "We're acquainted through her cousin in Cheyenne," Drake said smoothly, the lie flowing from his lips with convincing ease. "I promised I'd check on her while passing through." Violet kept her face carefully neutral, though her heart pounded like a steam engine. She had no cousin in Cheyenne. This man was fabricating an entire story on her behalf. "And where exactly were you two during the robbery?" Holden pressed. "We were at the creek east of town," Drake replied without hesitation. "Miss Fletcher was showing me where the best fishing spots are." Sheriff Holden turned his gaze to Violet. "That right, Miss Fletcher? You were fishing?" Violet nodded. "Yes, sir. We spent the afternoon there." "Strange," Holden mused, leaning back in his chair until it creaked in protest. "Because Mr. Carrington says he saw you clear as day at the bank." "Then Mr. Carrington is mistaken," Drake said firmly. "Or lying." The accusation hung in the air like gun smoke. Accusing Edgar Carrington, the bank manager and one of Sweetwater's most respected citizens, of lying was no small matter. "That's a serious claim," Holden warned. "So is wrongfully accusing an innocent woman of theft," Drake countered. Sheriff Holden studied them both for a long moment. "I'll hold you both here while I speak with Mr. Carrington again," he finally said. "If your stories don't match up, Miss Fletcher, you'll find yourself back in these bindings faster than a rattler strikes." After the sheriff left, closing the door firmly behind him, Violet turned to Drake, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why are you helping me? You don't even know me." Drake's eyes softened as he looked at her. "I know an innocent person when I see one," he said quietly. "And I've seen what happens when good people don't speak up." "But you're lying to the sheriff," Violet pressed. "You could get in serious trouble." "Better me than you." Drake moved to the window, peering through the dusty glass at the street outside. "Besides, I'm not convinced this is just about some missing money." Before Violet could question him further, the door opened and Sheriff Holden returned, accompanied by Edgar Carrington, a thin, hawk-nosed man with cold eyes that reminded Violet of a rattlesnake. "Well, well," Carrington said, his gaze sliding over Violet with undisguised contempt. "It seems our little thief has found herself a champion." Drake stepped forward, placing himself between Violet and Carrington. "Miss Fletcher is no thief," he said, his voice level but carrying a steely edge. "I saw her myself," Carrington insisted, turning to Sheriff Holden. "Yesterday evening, after the bank had closed, she was at my desk, rifling through papers." "That's impossible," Violet protested. "I was home all evening, working on Mrs. Abernathy's wedding dress." "A convenient claim with no one to verify it," Carrington sneered. "Except now she has me," Drake interjected. "And I'm willing to swear before a judge that Miss Fletcher was nowhere near the bank." Sheriff Holden looked uncomfortable, caught between Carrington's standing in the community and Drake's unwavering certainty. "Mr. Carrington, could you have been mistaken about what you saw?" "Absolutely not," Carrington snapped. "I know what I saw." "And what about the money?" Drake asked. "Was anything else disturbed in the bank? Papers? Documents?" Carrington's expression flickered for just an instant, so brief Violet thought she might have imagined it. "The safe was opened, $500 taken." "And how did Miss Fletcher manage that?" Drake pressed. "Did she know the combination?" "She must have watched me open it at some point," Carrington said, though his certainty seemed to waver. "Sheriff," Drake said, turning to Holden, "I think it would be worth checking if anyone saw Miss Fletcher near the bank yesterday evening, and perhaps examining Mr. Carrington's books more closely." Carrington's face flushed red. "Are you accusing me of something, stranger?" "Just suggesting a thorough investigation," Drake replied calmly, "before an innocent woman's reputation is ruined." Sheriff Holden scratched his stubbled chin. "Mr. Carrington, perhaps we should take a closer look at the bank, and I'll ask around town about Miss Fletcher's whereabouts yesterday." "This is outrageous!" Carrington sputtered. "The word of a drifter against mine?" "The word of a witness," Drake corrected. "And I'm no drifter. I own a ranch 30 miles north of here." This revelation surprised Violet as much as it did the others in the room. This man wasn't just some passing cowboy, he was a landowner, someone with standing. "Fine," Carrington finally said, straightening his waistcoat. "Investigate all you want, Sheriff, but keep that woman locked up until you do." "Miss Fletcher will remain in town," Sheriff Holden said, "but I see no need to keep her in a cell if Mr. Valero is willing to vouch for her." He turned to Drake. "You'll be responsible for making sure she doesn't leave Sweetwater." Drake nodded. "I'll guarantee her presence, Sheriff." After more discussion and formal statements taken, Violet found herself walking out of the jailhouse beside Drake Valero as the sun dipped below the western horizon, painting the sky in strokes of crimson and gold. She breathed in the fresh air, savoring her freedom, temporary though it might be. "Thank you," she said softly as they stepped onto the dusty street, "but I still don't understand why you're doing this." Drake glanced down at her, his expression unreadable in the gathering dusk. "Let's find somewhere to talk," he suggested. "I expect you're hungry." They made their way to the Sweetwater Cafe, a modest establishment at the quieter end of the main street. As they entered, Violet was acutely aware of the stares and whispers that followed them. Her reputation in this town, carefully built over 3 years of honest work, now hung by a thread. Once seated at a corner table with bowls of steaming stew before them, Violet found herself studying Drake Valero more carefully. He was older than she'd first thought, perhaps 32 or 23, with lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of years spent squinting into the sun. His hands were calloused, a working man's hands, and he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to relying on his own judgment. "Mr. Valero," she began. "Drake," he corrected, breaking a piece of cornbread. "If we're supposed to be acquainted, you'd best use my given name." "Drake, then," Violet said, the name feeling strange on her tongue. "I need to know why you stepped in. The truth." Drake ate a spoonful of stew before answering. "I was at the bank earlier today," he said quietly. "I heard Carrington accusing you, saw the sheriff drag you out. Something didn't sit right. But why risk yourself for a stranger?" "Because I've seen Carrington's type before," Drake said, his voice hardening slightly. "Men who use their position to take advantage. And I noticed how he looked at you not like someone who'd caught a thief, but like someone who'd been denied something he wanted." Violet's spoon paused halfway to her mouth as understanding dawned. "Mr. Carrington has made advances," she admitted reluctantly. "I refused him 3 times now. The last time was just yesterday morning when I delivered his wife's mended shawl." Drake's jaw tightened. "And suddenly you're accused of theft by evening. Convenient timing." But why would he go so far? Risk his reputation with a false accusation? "Men like Carrington don't think they're risking anything," Drake replied. "They believe their word will always be taken over someone like me," Violet finished. "A woman with no family, no connections." "Until now," Drake said, meeting her eyes across the table. "Now you have a witness." The warmth in his gaze made Violet's chest tighten in a way that had nothing to do with her recent ordeal. She looked down at her stew, suddenly flustered. "You mentioned a ranch," she said, changing the subject. "Yet you said we were at the creek yesterday. Won't people wonder why a rancher was in town?" "I'm here on business," Drake explained, "buying supplies, arranging cattle sales. I've been staying at the Frontier Hotel for 3 days. Violet frowned. But if you've been here 3 days, someone would have seen us together if your story were true. Drake smiled slightly. That's why I said we met at the creek outside of town. Less chance of anyone contradicting us. You've thought this through, Violet said, impressed despite herself. When you spend enough time dealing with cattle rustlers and land disputes, you learn to stay a step ahead, Drake replied. Now, tell me everything about your interactions with Carrington. I need to understand what we're dealing with. As night settled over Sweetwater Creek, Violet found herself sharing more than just the details of Carrington's unwanted attentions. She told Drake about coming west after losing her parents to influenza 3 years prior, about building a new life with only her sewing skills and determination. She described the small room above the general store where she lived and worked, the dreams she had of someday opening her own dress shop. In turn, Drake spoke of his ranch, the Valley 5, he called it, and the struggles of building it from nearly nothing after returning from the war with just enough money to stake a claim. He spoke of cattle drives and harsh winters, of the satisfaction of watching something grow through your own hard work. By the time they left the cafe, Violet felt as though she'd known Drake Valero far longer than a few hours. There was something about his steady presence that put her at ease, despite the precariousness of her situation. "I'll walk you home," Drake said as they stepped outside into the cool night air. "We should be seen together, make our story more believable." As they walked the short distance to the general store, Violet became aware of a figure following them in the shadows. Drake noticed too, his hand moving subtly to rest near his holstered revolver. "Miss Fletcher," a voice called, and Violet turned to see Thomas Weldon, the bank's clerk, stepping into the light cast by a nearby lantern. "I need to speak with you." Drake moved protectively closer to Violet. "State your business," he said, his tone making it clear that any threat would be met with resistance. "I'm not here to cause trouble," Thomas said, holding up his hands. "But I know Miss Fletcher didn't take that money." Violet's heart leaped with hope. "You do?" Thomas nodded nervously. "Mr. Carrington made me stay late yesterday to balance the ledgers. He was alone in the bank when I left, around 6 in the evening. There was no one else there, certainly not Miss Fletcher." "Would you be willing to say that to the sheriff?" Drake asked. The young clerk hesitated, fear evident in his expression. "Mr. Carrington would dismiss me. I have a mother and sisters to support." "What if you didn't have to worry about that?" Drake pressed. "What if we could guarantee you another position?" Thomas looked between them uncertainly. I don't know." "Think about it," Drake urged. "You know what's right here. Come find us tomorrow if you decide to help." After Thomas departed, melting back into the darkness, Drake and Violet continued to her lodgings in thoughtful silence. "Do you think he'll come forward?" Violet asked as they reached the stairs leading to her room. "Hard to say," Drake admitted. "Fear's a powerful thing, but so is conscience." They paused at the bottom of the stairs, an awkward moment stretching between them as they realized their charade of acquaintance had no script for this parting. "I'll call for you in the morning," Drake finally said. "We should continue to be seen together until this matter is resolved." "Thank you again," Violet said softly. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you." Drake's expression softened in the dim light. "There's nothing to repay. I couldn't stand by and watch an injustice when I had the power to intervene." He tipped his hat and turned to go, then paused. "Lock your door tonight," he advised, "and if you need anything, I'm in room 4 at the Frontier." Violet watched him walk away, his tall figure soon swallowed by the darkness before climbing the stairs to her small room. Despite the day's turmoil, she felt a strange sense of calm. For the first time since arriving in Sweetwater, she wasn't facing her troubles alone. Morning brought a clear sky and renewed determination. Drake arrived just as Violet finished pinning her honey-brown hair into a simple knot at the nape of her neck. His appearance drew curious looks from Mrs. Miller, the store owner's wife, who was sweeping the boardwalk below. "Good morning," Drake said when Violet descended the stairs. "I thought we might visit the sheriff together, see if he's learned anything new." They walked side by side down the main street, conscious of the townsfolk watching them with undisguised interest. Violet held her head high despite the whispers, drawing strength from Drake's solid presence beside her. At the jailhouse, they found Sheriff Holden looking troubled, his usual bluster subdued. "Timing's interesting," he said by way of greeting. "Just had 3 people come in this morning saying they saw Miss Fletcher nowhere near the bank yesterday evening." Hope flared in Violet's chest. "Then you believe me?" "Let's say I'm less certain of Carrington's account," Holden allowed, "but that still leaves the matter of the missing money." "Have you searched the bank thoroughly?" Drake asked. "Checked Carrington's office?" A shadow of discomfort crossed the sheriff's face. Mr. Carrington was reluctant to allow a search of his private office. "That seems suspicious, doesn't it?" Drake pressed. "It would," Holden agreed, "if he hadn't insisted that bank business is confidential. He's demanding a proper warrant before allowing me access to anything beyond the main floor." "And how long will that take?" Violet asked. "Circuit judge won't be through for another 2 weeks, Holden admitted. 2 weeks, Violet exclaimed. "I can't have this accusation hanging over me for 2 weeks. My business will be ruined." Drake placed a steadying hand on her arm. "Sheriff, surely there's another way. What if Mr. Carrington himself reported another theft? Would that give you cause to search immediately?" Holden narrowed his eyes. "What are you suggesting, Valero?" "Nothing underhanded," Drake assured him. "Just that sometimes people need a little encouragement to reveal the truth." As they left the jailhouse, Violet turned to Drake with questioning eyes. "What are you planning?" "A little trap," Drake replied, his voice low. "But first, we need more information." He guided her toward the bank, which had just opened for the day. Inside, they found Thomas Weldon at his desk, his expression turning anxious when he spotted them. "Mr. Weldon," Drake said pleasantly, "Miss Fletcher and I were hoping you might help us understand the bank's procedures." Thomas glanced nervously toward Carrington's closed office door. "I really shouldn't. It's just a few innocent questions," Drake pressed. "For instance, who else has access to the safe besides Mr. Carrington?" "Just Mr. Carrington and myself," Thomas replied reluctantly, "and Mr. Hargrove, the owner, but he's in Denver this month." "And who counts the money at the end of each day?" Drake continued. "I do the initial count," Thomas said, "but Mr. Carrington always verifies it before closing." "So he would know exactly how much should be there," Violet mused aloud. "Yes, madam," Thomas confirmed, then lowered his voice. "I've been thinking about what you asked last night. I'll do it. I'll tell the sheriff what I saw, or rather, what I didn't see." Relief washed over Violet. "Thank you, Thomas. That's very brave." The clerk's face flushed slightly. "It's the right thing to do, but there's something else you should know." He glanced again at Carrington's door before continuing in a whisper. "Mr. Carrington has been acting strangely the past few weeks. staying late, locking himself in his office, and I've noticed discrepancies in the ledgers. Drake leaned in. What kind of discrepancies? Small amounts missing, then reappearing days later, Thomas explained, as if someone were borrowing from the bank temporarily. The implications of this revelation hung heavy between them. Before they could discuss it further, Carrington's office door opened, and the banker himself emerged, freezing when he saw Violet and Drake. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, his face mottling with anger. "How dare you show your face in this bank after what you've done?" "I've done nothing wrong," Violet replied calmly, though her heart raced. "And we both know it." Carrington's eyes darted nervously to Thomas, then back to Drake. "Sheriff Holden will hear about this harassment. I want you both out of my bank immediately." "We're just leaving," Drake said, his tone pleasant but his eyes hard. "But we'll be back, Mr. Carrington. Count on it." Outside, Drake led Violet across the street to a bench beneath the shade of an elm tree. "Carrington's in trouble," he said once they were seated. "Probably gambling debts. He's been skimming from the bank, covering his tracks by moving money around. And when he couldn't hide it anymore, he needed a scapegoat," Violet concluded. "Me." "Exactly," Drake agreed. "But he didn't count on anyone questioning his word." "So what do we do now?" Violet asked. Drake's expression turned grim. "We force his hand. Make him panic enough to make a mistake." He stood, offering Violet his hand. "Come on, we need to pay a visit to Mrs. Carrington." Edgar Carrington's home was a stately two-story affair at the edge of town, a testament to his position in Sweetwater's hierarchy. A maid answered their knock, eyeing them suspiciously, before reluctantly showing them to a sitting room where Beatrice Carrington received them with cool curiosity. "Miss Fletcher," she said, setting aside her embroidery, "this is unexpected. And you've brought a friend." "Drake Valero, madam." Drake introduced himself with a respectful nod. "We apologize for the intrusion, but we needed to speak with you about a delicate matter." Mrs. Carrington's eyebrows rose slightly. "Indeed. What could possibly require such an unusual visit?" Violet leaned forward. "Mrs. Carrington, I'm sure you've heard by now of your husband's accusation against me." "I have," the woman acknowledged, her expression revealing nothing. "Edgar says you betrayed his trust terribly." "His accusation is false," Violet said firmly, "and I believe you might be able to help prove that." "How would I possibly do that?" Mrs. Carrington asked, though something in her tone suggested she wasn't entirely surprised by the conversation. Drake took over. "Madam, we have reason to believe your husband has been struggling with some financial difficulties, perhaps gambling debts." The flicker in Mrs. Carrington's eyes confirmed their suspicion before she could compose herself. "That is a very serious insinuation, Mr. Valero." "It is," Drake agreed, "and not one we make lightly. But Miss Fletcher's reputation, her very freedom, is at stake." Mrs. Carrington was silent for a long moment, studying them both. Finally, she sighed, her shoulders slumping slightly. "What exactly do you want from me?" "Information," Violet said gently. "Anything that might help clear my name." The older woman twisted her wedding ring absently. "Edgar has been troubled lately, coming home late, drinking more than usual. 2 weeks ago, I found a letter, a demand for payment of $300, with threats if he didn't comply." "From whom?" Drake asked. "A man named Wilson, Samuel Wilson. He runs card games out of the back room at the Silver Dollar." Drake nodded, recognition in his eyes. "I've heard of him. Not a man to cross." Edgar swore he would handle it, Mrs. Carrington continued, that I wasn't to worry. Then yesterday he came home looking satisfied, as if a burden had been lifted. Her gaze sharpened on Violet. That's when he mentioned catching you stealing from the bank. A convenient solution to his problem, Drake observed. $500 missing, but a thief to blame. Mrs. Carrington's lips thinned. My husband is not a perfect man, Mr. Valero, but I never thought him capable of destroying an innocent person's life to save his own reputation. Would you be willing to tell Sheriff Holden about the letter? Violet asked. It might be enough to convince him to search your husband's office at the bank. Fear flashed across Mrs. Carrington's face. I don't know if I can do that. Madam, Drake said quietly, I understand your reluctance to speak against your husband, but consider what happens if the truth comes out another way. The scandal would be far worse. Mrs. Carrington rose and walked to the window, staring out at her carefully tended garden. Give me until tomorrow, she finally said. I need to think, and to speak with Edgar. As they left the Carrington home, Violet felt both hope and trepidation warring within her. Do you think she'll help us? I think she cares about her position in this town, Drake replied, and she's smart enough to know that getting ahead of this scandal is better than being consumed by it. They spent the remainder of the day gathering more information about Carrington's movements and habits. Drake visited the Silver Dollar, confirming through careful conversation that Carrington had indeed been a regular at Wilson's card games, often losing heavily. Violet, meanwhile, spoke with other shopkeepers along the main street, learning that Carrington had been seen entering the bank late in the evening multiple times over the past month. As sunset approached, they reunited at the cafe to share what they'd learned. Their heads were bent close together over cups of coffee when Thomas Weldon burst through the door, his face flushed with excitement. Miss Fletcher, Mr. Valero, he called, hurrying to their table. You need to come quickly. Mr. Carrington is at the bank and Sheriff Holden is with him. There's been another theft. They rushed to the bank where a small crowd had already gathered outside the open doors. Inside, they found Sheriff Holden confronting a visibly agitated Edgar Carrington. Let me understand this, the sheriff was saying as they entered. You're now claiming that someone broke into the bank again last night and stole another $300. Yes, Carrington insisted. The same thief, obviously. While you've been wasting time doubting my word, the culprit has struck again. Strange timing, Drake commented loudly, drawing everyone's attention. Especially considering Miss Fletcher spent all of yesterday in my company, under your own instructions, Sheriff. Sheriff Holden's eyes narrowed as he looked between Drake and Carrington. Indeed, makes it mighty difficult for her to have been responsible for this second theft. It must have been an accomplice, Carrington blustered, though his confidence was clearly wavering. Or, Drake suggested, stepping forward, there was no theft at all, just a desperate man trying to cover his gambling debts. How dare you? Carrington sputtered, his face turning an alarming shade of red. Edgar, a new voice said from the doorway, and everyone turned to see Beatrice Carrington standing there, her expression grave. It's time to tell the truth. The banker's face drained of color. Beatrice, what are you doing here? Preventing you from making an even bigger mistake, she replied, approaching the group with surprising composure. She turned to Sheriff Holden. My husband has a gambling problem, Sheriff. He owes money to Samuel Wilson, money he took from this bank. That's a lie, Carrington protested, though his voice lacked conviction. Is it? Mrs. Carrington reached into her reticule and withdrew a folded paper. Then explain this letter demanding payment, and explain why you suddenly had $500 to give Wilson yesterday afternoon, when you told me just 2 days ago that we couldn't afford to repair the roof. Sheriff Holden took the letter, reading it with a deepening frown. Mr. Carrington, I believe we need to have a look at your office and those bank ledgers now. What followed was the rapid unraveling of Edgar Carrington's deception. Thomas Weldon, emboldened by Mrs. Carrington's stand, revealed the ledger discrepancies he'd noticed. A search of Carrington's office uncovered a receipt from Wilson for the $500, dated the previous day the exact amount Carrington had claimed was stolen. By nightfall, Edgar Carrington was occupying the cell in which he had intended to place Violet, charged with embezzlement and filing false accusations. Sheriff Holden, looking somewhat abashed, officially cleared Violet of all suspicion. I owe you an apology, Miss Fletcher, he said as they stood outside the jailhouse beneath a sky awash with stars. I should have been more thorough before accepting Carrington's word. You were doing your job, Sheriff, Violet replied graciously, and in the end, justice was served. Thanks largely to Mr. Valero here, Holden acknowledged, extending his hand to Drake. Sweetwater Creek is in your debt, sir. After the sheriff returned to his office, Violet and Drake stood alone in the quiet street, the events of the past 2 days settling around them like dust after a storm. What happens now? Violet asked softly, looking up at Drake's face in the gentle glow of the street lamps. That depends, he replied, his voice equally soft. My business in town is finished. I should be heading back to my ranch tomorrow. Disappointment settled in Violet's chest, heavy and unexpected. In just 2 days, this man had become important to her in ways she hadn't anticipated. I see, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Well, I can never thank you enough for what you've done. Drake studied her face for a long moment. You could thank me by having dinner with me tomorrow evening, he finally said, before I go. Violet's heart quickened. I'd like that very much. Drake escorted her home for the second night, but this time when they reached the stairs to her room, he hesitated, seeming uncharacteristically uncertain. Violet, he said, using her given name for the first time, I want you to know that even though our meeting was unconventional, I'm glad it happened. So am I, she admitted, warmth spreading through her at his words. Good night, then, he said, taking her hand briefly in his. Until tomorrow. Violet watched him go, her hand still tingling from his touch, and knew with sudden clarity that she didn't want tomorrow's dinner to be goodbye. Morning brought unexpected news. The bank's owner, Mr. Hargrove, had been telegraphed about Carrington's crimes and was returning immediately from Denver. Furthermore, with Carrington's dismissal, the position of bank manager was now vacant. By mid-afternoon, rumors circulated that Thomas Weldon would be promoted to assistant manager, while the town council searched for a suitable replacement for Carrington. Violet, walking to the general store with fabric for Mrs. Abernathy's finally completed wedding dress, overheard these discussions with satisfaction. Thomas deserved recognition for his honesty. As promised, Drake called for her that evening, looking handsome in a clean shirt and vest, his usual trail dust washed away. He took her to the nicest restaurant in Sweetwater, a place Violet had never been able to afford on her seamstress's earnings. Over a dinner far more elaborate than their previous meal at the cafe, they talked not of the drama that had brought them together, but of themselves, their hopes, their histories, their dreams. I always wanted a shop of my own, Violet confessed as they lingered over apple pie. Somewhere I could create beautiful things and be my own mistress. Why not here in Sweetwater? Drake asked. Violet sighed. I've been saving, but it's slow work. And after this incident with Carrington, well, even though I've been cleared, mud sticks. Drake considered this. What about somewhere else? A fresh start? Perhaps someday, she said. For now, I'm just grateful to have my freedom and my reputation intact, thanks to you. Drake reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers. I didn't do it alone. You fought for yourself, stood your ground. That takes courage. Their eyes met across the table, and Violet felt something shift between them, a possibility taking form, fragile but undeniable. I have to return to my ranch tomorrow, Drake said, his voice regretful. There's work that won't wait. I understand, Violet replied, though disappointment tightened her throat. But Sweetwater isn't far, he continued, his eyes never leaving hers. I could ride in from time to time, if there was reason to. Violet's heart fluttered. I think there might be reason. Drake smiled then, a full, genuine smile that transformed his serious face. Good, he said simply. Because I'm not ready to say goodbye to you, Violet Fletcher. They walked slowly back through town, neither eager for the evening to end. When they reached her stairs, Drake took both her hands in his. When I rode into Sweetwater 3 days ago, I never imagined I'd find someone worth coming back for, he said softly. And I never imagined that being falsely accused of theft would lead to meeting someone like you, Violet replied with a small laugh. Drake's expression grew serious. May I call on you properly when I return? No pretense, no witness statements, just a man interested in a remarkable woman. I'd like that very much, Violet said, her voice barely above a whisper. Drake leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, but Violet remained still. Her heart racing as his lips met hers in a gentle, brief kiss, a promise of something new beginning. When he pulled back, his eyes were warm with an emotion that made Violet's breath catch. I'll be back in 2 weeks, he said. That's a promise. True to his word, Drake returned exactly 2 weeks later, riding into town on a handsome bay gelding as Violet was closing up her sewing room for the day. Their courtship began in earnest, then proper, but filled with a connection that deepened with each visit. By summer's end, Drake had proposed, offering Violet not just his heart, but partnership in his dreams. The Valley Vive Ranch became their home, and Violet's sewing skills found new purpose in creating curtains and quilts for their house, and eventually, tiny garments for the children who would follow. Years later, when Sweetwater Creek had grown into a proper town with a railway station and a hotel that actually deserved the name, Drake and Violet would sometimes reminisce about their unusual first meeting. Best witness I ever claimed to be, Drake would say with a wink to their curious children. And Violet, her hand finding his across their dining table, would smile and add, and the only time being accused of something I didn't do turned out to be the greatest blessing of my life. In the wild spaces of Wyoming Territory, where justice sometimes came slowly and second chances were rare, they had found in each other not just love, but redemption proof that even in the hardest times, standing for truth could lead to unexpected joy.